If we spirits have offended, dismember Mike, he's undefended. Hey everybody, welcome to T Infinity Live, your weekly multi-platform, multi-publisher, tabletop gaming supplement. I'm your host, William Big T Thrasher. With me, as always, is Mike Jolly Varhola, Brendan Cass, and tonight we have a very special guest, artist and game designer, Lucas Puryear. How you doing, Lucas?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, doing great. And tonight, our topic is Play Thyself. We're going to talk about playing characters based on yourself in tabletop role-playing, and all the ways that can go very well and all the ways that can go horribly wrong. But before we go into that central topic, we do have a couple of things to bring you all up to speed on. First and foremost, Brendan, what is going on with our website, d-infinity.net?
All right, well, let's get started with the series of feats of arms that Clint has been writing for the RuneQuest system. He's got 2 articles on the front page right now, one of them for a swordsmaster, one of them more general stuff for just soldiers. And for those of you unfamiliar with the RuneQuest system, those are special combat actions that you can use during the game, and he has put a lot of thought into those. They're pretty cool, so worth checking out, especially if you play the Quest system. Now, we've got another top 5 post from Chris Van Deelen. This time it's his top 5 post-apocalyptic TV series. So, for those of you following along at home, this is now his 3rd top 5 list. We started off with books, then movies. Now we're on TV series. And again, I've mentioned it before. I'll mention it now. Chris is probably well, first off, he's one of the most prolific sci-fi authors I've ever run into, and also one of the biggest sci-fi fanboys I've ever run into. So he really knows his stuff. And finally, and I'm going to have to give credit to you here, Will, you wrote up the oddities for a picked pocket, which is a really handy list. Well, it's a list, but these are all fleshed out concepts of what you might find in a picked pocket. And I've even started using it in my own games because even beyond when you're picking a pocket, you never know what garbage a monster or an NPC has in their pockets when they've been, like, killed, for example. And your players always ask. They always ask, what's in his pocket? Do I find any loot on this guy? Well, yeah, you find, like, 20 gold or something like that is what I usually default to. But now I actually have a list of interesting things that might end up leading to an adventure or something like that. At any rate, it gives me better answers. I've never been good at coming up with treasure or inventories on the fly. I'll come up with everything else, but for whatever reason, I run into a roadblock when it comes to inventories. So that's a good list, and this is also worth mentioning. It almost unseated my random tavern generator as the #1 most popular thing on the website. So definitely an article and list worth checking out.
Is used Kleenex on that list? Because who hasn't borrowed a jacket from someone and found a used Kleenex in the pocket? It happens every time.
Mike, that's horrible.
No, but it's true. And actually,
it's so true.
You can have them. Ooh, yeah, there's used Kleenex. Make a saving throw. You don't even have to really have a contagion in mind. But, ooh, yeah, no, it's pretty used. I'm just saying.
You roll versus disgust.
It's the corner of a gelatinous cube.
Oh, no!
Yeah, no doubt.
Or a D50 shade of gray ooze.
Or what they used to call on Ren and Stimpy, nose goblins.
Indeed. But no, actually, in my next update, I was planning on adding a piece of chewing gum spit out and put back in its original wrapper.
Oh no, that's awful. Oh.
Well, you're the one digging through monsters' pockets. You can't expect them all to be
humans' pockets have
sandwiches
horrible
with waxed paper with the treasure map written on the paper.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you just think about it, if you root through a kid's pockets, a human child's pockets, it's disgusting. Now imagine what you're going to get from rooting through a monster's pockets. It's awful.
It looks like a map, and there's a little tiny gold nugget on one corner.
Wow. Well, speaking of gold, Mike, what is going on with our co-publisher Skirmisher?
Well, as Brendan put so aptly, we don't have any new products out this week, but we've been out this week. Brendan and I are now at the end of the Skirmisher road trip, and it has been an intense week, and it has been a positive week, and we pushed hard, and I think that the positive experiences we had all week just kept us going. We drove from Chicago to Raleigh, North Carolina, and the route we took was we did a number of site visits in Chicago. We went to a great bar called the Geek Bar, where people can now find Skirmisher publications. So anyone who doesn't know Skirmisher and doesn't know D-Infinity can now find copies of a lot of our publications at the Geek Bar. We did a demo game of Little Orc Wars there. We mentioned that actually on last week's show, because then last week's show was from, we did it from the Wandering Dragon Game Shop in Plainfield, Illinois, and met with Kevin and Laura Martin, the owners of that store, and a bunch of our other affiliates came out. They came out from around the Chicago area to spend the evening with us. The next day then, we went to the Field Museum of Natural History. We talk on this show about the importance of field work, about the importance of research. So we went to some world-class exhibits, a voodoo exhibit that we're actually going to get some material out of for some game development we're doing, a Vikings exhibit where we learned things about Vikings that are less commonly known, like the kinds of relics and artifacts they would put in the foundations of their houses.
That's right. They treated them as magic items.
What's that?
They treated them as magic items. They would place them in the foundation of their home for protection. That's role-playing game stuff right there, and it's there in history, ready for people to find. It's an excellent museum.
Yeah, so we got a lot of good material out of that. And then on Friday we hit the road, and we spent the evening and did gaming with Bryce and Mars Whitaker in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Bryce is a great guy. He's a WotC brand manager and a friend of the show, a friend of our venture, and we appreciate his hospitality. And you know what? I think, I'm not going to beat it to death on the show. We're posting a series of reports. We shot a documentary when we were on the road. We shot the footage for a documentary that we're going to turn into a documentary. But I would just say, and Brendan can chime in here at any time, we were touched with the way people treated us. People put us up in their homes. People fed us. My friend Megan Irvine repaired my beret. The leather was tearing away and the tassels were broken, and she just sat down and she fixed it all for us. So people were warm, they were friendly, they were kind. In a week of being on the road, going to game stores, people's homes, we did not have a single negative experience. I have some cousins in Cambridge, Ohio, including a Richard Varhola and a Jeremy Varhola. I've been in touch with them for years, but never met them face to face. And they said, "You're driving through. You got to come by and play D&D with us." So we went by their home and we played D&D with them for about 4 hours. Yep. So it was a positive, warm, very touching experience for us to have people be so kind and so welcoming and so friendly at every step of the way along the route.
Yep. If anything that we were doing was in question at any point in the past, this trip really just sort of validated everything. To run into people who I have never met before, who have either watched our show or read one of our books or one of these things and enjoyed it. It was really awesome. It was really special. Yeah,
it really was. So I want to give shout-outs to everyone. I don't want anyone to feel left out, but it'll all be in the written report. But we met
and the documentary.
And the documentary, exactly. But Nicholas Alba, who's someone who's looking at writing for us, we met him for the first time in Pittsburgh. We got to see our friend Chris Snyder, our friend John Richmond, Stefan Rice, Rico Nardini, who has been a fixture on this show. And then, of course, when we got to your folks' house in Potomac, Maryland, Brendan, your dad, he loves the venture, and we got to do some gaming with him, which was really terrific. He's one of our biggest allies, and now I'm over at my dad's place, and he and I have done nothing for the last 2 days but talk about what we're doing with the company. So it's just like a perfect storm. Everything just came together at exactly the right time for us.
Very cool. Yeah, I cannot wait to see that footage you guys shot.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Absolutely.
All right, and Lucas, I know you've been recently as well.
Yeah, I've been trying to finalize my game because I'm done talking about it. In 24 hours, I'm launching the Kickstarter for it. And a little inspiration from these two guys, one of the stretch goals is going to be a road trip.
Oh,
Go
very
to
cool.
game stores and demo it.
Cool. That's pretty neat. Well, we approve. This is the kind of thing we would do.
Yeah, what can you tell us about your game?
It's a point-buy system. The character sheet that I did of myself for tonight's session is done using that. I barely made it into player character land, but kind of like D20, except you take the D20, split it in half. You have a D10 for stat, D10 for skill. You roll them together and see what you get. If you don't have the skill, you just roll the stat and the D10 for that.
Brooklyn is called Sagas of Old.
Yes, which will be part of a larger system called Tail Mix, which I'll have a superhero and a space opera setting for that as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Are those settings going to be part of stretch goals, or is those like future Kickstarter plans?
Those are future games. First, I'm getting the fantasy one because, well, fantasy is the one that most gamers play in the beginning. So, get it started out with something people are familiar with and branch from there.
Very cool. And we will once the Kickstarter goes live, we will be putting a link to that up on the show archive and also on the event page, so people can follow that when it comes out. And hopefully, we can get you on the show again before it wraps up. Let people know how it went.
That'd be awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, gentlemen, are you ready for our main topic?
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, so as stated at the beginning of the show, our topic is Play Thyself, playing characters based on yourself in various role-playing games. Before we get into our questions, and we did get several good questions from the audience, we'll just go around the room, give everybody a general sense of where you fall on this. I have very, very rarely ever played a character based on myself, in part because I'm very much into the escapism of tabletop RPGs, and I want to create a character that's very different from what I do. Also, I run more games than I play, so the only time I once included myself as an NPC, but the joke was that NPC was also literally God. So that was a fun, twisted thing. But it's very, very rare. The only times I've ever really played with it is when the GM required it as part of the campaign. So it's something that I've avoided. I suppose I've avoided it because I don't want to end up playing a Mary Sue, but also I tend to get pretty self-deprecating. So any character I make based on myself would probably be a very unflattering depiction of myself.
And
how about you, Brendan?
I think it's spot on that that last bit you mentioned, the self-deprecation. When you're making a character based on yourself, you run into one of two things almost inevitably, unless you're real careful with how you pull your character together. If you're left to your own devices to design your own character, you get people who will either build a character who's completely impotent because they don't like to be real boastful of themselves, or you end up with a character that's real overpowered because you have someone who is really, I guess, overestimates their abilities. And in both cases, I would say usually the opposite of true. It is true. The people who tend to downplay themselves are usually a lot better, and the people who overplay themselves are usually a lot worse. So if you flip those things are true. I saw some interesting posts from people, viewers, in the event page where they were talking about how they sort of did it by consensus. They had the whole party sort of anonymously write what they think the greatest attributes of each of the individual people were in the party, and then ended up building the character that way. And I think that's a great idea. I think it's something that people should, if they're interested in this concept, I think that's a good way to do it, because you're going to end up getting a much more honest opinion, because people tend to be better judges of other people than themselves. So the only issue there is you can't do it if you're a gaming group that's new to each other.
Right.
Or maybe you can. Maybe it's more interesting if you just base characters off of people's first impressions of each other. That's kind of fun. But if I have to talk about my own personal experience, I have put myself. I run a lot of games too, usually because I write a lot of game material and I have to play test it. So I've put myself in a game once, and I was the arch villain. So similar to the kind of sort of backhanded joke that Will made when he made his NPC god, I made myself the arch villain because when you're talking about the meta concepts in the game, the DM is always the enemy, right? The DM is always trying to defeat the character. So I just put myself right in the game as a villain so I could actively try to defeat the players.
That's clever.
Other than that, I've played myself once in a game, and I guess if we're going to talk about individual times when we've played ourselves, then I will save that for later. But I've done it once. It was kind of a fun experience, but that's my overall impression. I've got no negative feeling towards it. I think it's tricky.
And how about you, Lucas?
Me? I've actually, like you said, played myself once in a game because the GM required it, and we all wrote our characters up and then passed them around so that people would go, you really don't have this, or you need more of this. I don't often play myself in role-playing games because, well, like you said, escapism. I'm never going to be the athletic character that even the basic D&D character would be. Usually, if I play myself, it's in like a wrestling computer game, and I just muck with the physical abilities a little bit, but generally looks like me.
And how about you, Mike?
I'm going to answer this question from a different approach than any of y'all did, in a slightly more philosophical way, and maybe sort of peak the way people think about this. I've said often, and I've written 17 books. I'm the author of 17 history books or travel guides, in addition to the books that I've published with Skirmisher and D Infinity. I've often said that every book that someone writes is at least semi-autobiographical. Every book that someone writes is, and it's almost a truism. I mean, when it comes right down to it, it's almost uninteresting when you consider it like that. Everything that anyone would write is just an expression of their own personality, their own experiences, the point of view that they want to project. It would be impossible to write anything that was not on some level semi-autobiographical, an expression of oneself. So I would postulate that you always play yourself. When I am playing a character on some level, it doesn't matter the class, it doesn't matter the system, it doesn't matter the technology level, it doesn't matter the alignment, it doesn't matter anything. On some level, that character is me. I'm always playing myself. Now, I can try to assume a specific role, I can try to take things from a specific angle or point of view, but I'm not going to play that same character the way somebody else would. So that doesn't mean every time you play a character it's always played the same way, unless you're certain players that we were ragging about this, Brendan. It doesn't mean that you can't bring an interesting treatment or try to play better or try to play different, but you are always playing yourself is what I would say. That's just given. You're always playing. And when you're a DM, the world that you've created is a glimpse inside your own mind. There's a movie that I think is pretty good. Not everybody thinks it's pretty good. It's The Cell. And essentially, a character goes into the mind of a completely warped killer and sees the world that is the inside of his mind. And that's what a D&D scenario is. It is a glimpse into the mind of a specific other person. And that's why, for example, our Swords of Coast Fantasy campaign setting, why I find it to be very interesting and compelling, because it's a multi-author project. So it is a glimpse into the composite product of the minds of many different people, of you, Will, of you, Brendan, of me, of Clint and Chris Van Deelen and all the other people who have contributed to it. So we could talk a little bit more, in specifics as we move ahead with this show about playing a character based explicitly on oneself, but my contention is that you're always playing yourself regardless.
It's a good point. Your different characters just sort of end up being different aspects of yourself,
Mhm.
right? It's kind of like that Buddhist, the ancient Buddhist perspective that you've got different parts of you inside of yourself, and they can all sort of be represented in different ways.
Right.
Well, our first viewer question comes from David Paul Lehman, who wants to know, if you were to play yourself again, what setting or type of setting would you like to enter? I guess in my own case, I would I would kind of like to do it in a Narnia type setting. Most of the times I've played myself in a fantasy setting, it's always been an urban fantasy. It's always been kind of like World of Darkness. It's always been a setting where you're like a monster or something supernatural that starts from a human place. But I love fish out of water stories. I don't get to do nearly as many fish out of water stories at the tabletop as I would like to. So yeah, I would love to play myself plucked into an overall whimsical fantasy land where a very high stakes battle between good and evil is happening. And frankly, I'd love to have that temptation between what side I'm going to join. I think that would be tremendously fun to play out as myself. Mike?
Rephrase the question for me.
See, if you were to play yourself again, what setting or type of setting would you like to enter?
Well, I mean, that's easy for me. I think it's fairly predictable. I conceived of and created the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. I flew to Greece and then sailed to Coast Island so that I could spend a week there exploring the island and learning more about it. So to me, I perceive my ideal adventure, the adventure I want to play now at this point in my life, on a warm, post-apocalyptic, dark fantasy, swords and sorcery Aegean island. So that is where I see myself, and that's why I'm creating a campaign setting where my characters can exist in that reality, and both doing everything I can to be able to physically go there myself for purposes of research, so that I can exist in the closest thing to that reality that I can. So swords and sorcery in a Dark Ages Aegean island setting is what I would say.
How about you, Lucas?
Well, while I would love to go into the Tulicia, which is the name of the world for my game, in honor of Terry Pratchett, today I'm going to say I'd love to go to Discworld.
Yeah, and that's actually something we forgot to mention at the top of the show. The news came out today that Sir Terry Pratchett, creator of Discworld, co-author of Good Omens, author of the Truckers trilogy, among so many other things, passed away today at the age of 66. So I do plan to drink to him heavily later tonight, quote some of his books very, very badly, but the world of fantasy is taking a pretty big hit today.
I had not known that. Thank you for mentioning that, guys.
You've only got until March 15th to make sure that you've got your health insurance policy.
Well, he was British. He was under national health, so.
What? You've never seen Color of Magic? The policy?
Oh, right, the insurance.
I've unfortunately never read any of his books, but I've seen Color of Magic and The Hogfather, and I really loved them.
Yeah, they're worth picking out. And actually, there is a GURPS Discworld tabletop source book illustrated by Paul Kidby. Well worth picking up if you just want a good textbook introduction to Discworld.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's all too bad. You're right. That is sort of a tragic thing. I think that's a reason for us to all be a little sadder today.
Yeah.
Oh, but how about you, Brendan? What kind of fantasy setting would you like to enter as yourself?
Fantasy setting.
Well, I guess it could be any gaming setting, really.
Yeah, any game setting, right?
Any game setting. Well, I've done a lot. I've played myself in a sci-fi setting or like a cyberpunk setting, and it's just kind of predictable, I guess. And I've played myself in kind of like a modern urban fantasy setting, similar to you, Will. the sort of setting where I would do really poorly, I would just be just fodder, just do really really badly, is a low or no magic sort of fantasy setting where
Extraneous.
basically muscle-bound brutes rule the world with martial skill alone. I don't weigh it nearly enough. I am not a bruiser in any way, shape, or form. So I'd be interested in playing myself in that kind of scenario. In part, well, it's a little bit depressing because I'd probably get whacked really quick. But I'm interested to see if I would be able to manage to stay alive or arrange something so that I could succeed in that kind of world. So I think if I had to play myself again in a fantasy setting, that would be the sort of thing. Because I figure, well, in Cyberpunk, I've already got the skills necessary to be successful.
That's you.
It is me.
You are cyberpunk in real life.
I am a cyberpunk, minus the like glowing EL wire clothing and things like that. And in a traditional fantasy setting, even swords and sorcery, I figure if I didn't have a computer available to me, I would probably learn how to cast a spell. Probably.
Well, that's kind of the equivalent, isn't it, Brendan? I mean, that would be the
I
equivalent.
always thought so.
You would just redirect your skill set. You would take the same tools that built that skill set
Right.
and use them to build the next closest thing to it.
Exactly. I always figured programming and spellcasting are basically analogs of each other. They're basically the same thing.
Didn't you do an article that really looked at the comparisons between programming and spellcasting?
I did, specifically on malware. So
Right.
what computer viruses or computer malware would look like in a world with no computers, but there's technology. Because basically I figure the personality of those two different types of people are the same. And so if those are the same, then odds are there are all kinds of like magical hoaxes and magical malware and things like that running around in the fantasy world. And that's something that nobody's done. Nobody's done it. So I figured I would write an article about it.
So what about you, Will?
Yeah, what are you, Will?
Oh, I already answered that question.
Oh, you answered it first. That's right.
Oh, what are you, Lucas?
But no, I think we've all touched on it. But there is something I do want to get to before we do any more viewer questions, and that's a little exercise I had everybody on the show do, and we'll go ahead and do a little show and tell now. Each of us has statted ourselves up as a character in a game, and we thought we'd go ahead and share what we did. I went ahead and statted myself up as a 5 D&D 5e character. I went ahead and figuring out what role I would best fit into, I decided that it would be a spellcaster role, but specifically a warlock. And in this case, a warlock that gets their magical power from a great old one, because so many of my creative endeavors are connected to the Cthulhu mythos. And when I go up a high enough level, I'm going to take a book bond because I am a hell of a researcher. That's just one of my reference library bookshelves right there. So I went with a very, very magic kind of a bookish character. Just for fun though, my lowest stat is wisdom because I can be kind of scatterbrained at times, but my charisma is through the roof.
Yes, it is, Will.
Thank you.
We certainly think so.
Yes, it is.
Now, Lucas, you went ahead and statted yourself up for Sagas of Old.
Yes, I'm gonna put the link in the event thing real quick.
Excellent. And what can you tell us about the way you statted yourself up?
Well, I chose not to give myself an archetype. I went freeform and just gave myself a bunch of skills that I knew I had. Generally knowledges and very few combat skills. Gave myself wrestling as my focal point for my combat because I have done a little bit of training to be a wrestler before, and bows because, well, I like to shoot bows. It's kind of fun, but the skills that are in bold are the everyman skills, and so everybody gets those. They didn't cost me any points. A normal character is 100 points. I barely made it to 126, so it means I haven't gone on very many adventures. I raised mostly mental skills and actually lowered a couple physical skills. Or stats, sorry. Because humans get a bonus in 4 stats and a negative in 2 stats. And, well, you've seen I have trouble getting around sometimes.
It is not nearly as bad as you make it sound. I think you may have cut yourself a little bit short on your stats.
I can fall laying down.
Well, how about you, Brendan?
Well, let's see. I stood myself up for the Swords of Infinity role-playing game system. This is a system that Skirmisher is in development with and has lots of big fancy plans for. But so it's a percentile system, which anyone who's played percentile systems is going to be at least somewhat familiar with, but a little bit different. So as far as my characteristic scores go, I would say my lowest characteristic score is vitality. That's because, unfortunately, I am plagued with issues like knee conditions and crap like that require surgery. So, not so fun. Followed by strength. As you can tell, there is not much meat on this arm here, so probably not my highest stat. I can try hard, but it doesn't mean I can lift a whole lot. Then following that right along, dexterity is my next highest score by kind of a large margin, actually. The next few stats are kind of higher. Dexterity and awareness being kind of co-equal with each other, and that's probably mostly because of 15 years or so of martial arts training. And then
martial arts training is apparently really hard on your knees.
Yeah, no, the martial arts did totally hose my knees. That's literally the reason why they're all screwed up. I basically prematurely aged just my knees. So, yeah, they're all messed up. Then personality after that, which of course comes across in my bright and shining demeanor on the show. And then finally, intelligence, just because that's really where I put most of my specializations. So then, of course, in the Swords of Infinity system, you have a whole bunch of specializations. I gave myself a D100 of experience points for each year of schooling and or work. So ended up coming out with, let's see, 550 experience points, which comes out to give me experience in all kinds of different knowledges, mostly programming and computer knowledges. Then, some personality-based skills like negotiation and storytelling. I even gave myself a specialization in gaming webcast host. I get a +10 to that. And then as far as weapons go, because I set it up basically myself, my weapons are either unarmed, which is a bludgeoning weapon, of course, or I've got a lever action sort of cowboy-style varmint rifle that I inherited. And I'm a pretty good shot, so that's my range weapon.
Very cool. And how about you, Mike?
Well, I decided to stat myself for a specific time and place, a specific system. So I used the D20 V.3.5 rules and statted myself up as a character for the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. So a D&D character for the Swords of Coast setting. And the methodology I followed was to not try to objectively figure out or subjectively figure out what my various physical or mental stats would be. I just took the standard elite array that a player character gets. So not the very best, not the very worst, but the one that a standard player character gets. I adjusted it for age, being middle-aged because I'm 48, and then I adjusted it for bonus points for levels. Yep. So I put my highest score in intelligence, I used to test at 149 IQ. That's about a 15 intelligence. So I put my best score in intelligence. I put my lowest score in wisdom because I don't know, looking back over my 48 years, if I've ever passed a will save. I may not have. That was sort of the range for me. And I statted myself, and I can justify all this. I don't think I was extravagant. I statted myself as a fighter 2. I got out of the Army as an infantry sergeant, so I was an infantryman and a combat veteran. So I figured, having made it to NCO level, in D&D, if you had a sergeant with a group of troops, he'd be a second-level fighter. So I statted myself as a second-level fighter. I took fighter instead of warrior because I ended up with the kinds of bonus feats you would have. So I was specialized as an anti-tank gunner. So I would have exotic weapon rockets, because that was something that in a semi-technological setting like the Swords of Coast setting, that's what I would have. Exotic weapon proficiency, rockets. And then I would have standard proficiency with all the other crap a soldier would know how to use. Spear, sword, dagger, whatever. I don't really know how to use most of that stuff, but I do know how to use rifles and pistols, so that would be the equivalent. That would translate. So 2 levels of fighter. I gave myself 1 level of cleric because I am, in fact, an ordained minister, and I do periodically do weddings and pet funerals and worship regularly and study religion in earnest in real life. So I figured it wasn't a stretch to give myself 1 level of cleric. And then I had to figure out, what's the rest of my class? Realistically, what am I? And I determined I was a specialist. A specialist is just skirmishers, player character twist on the expert. The expert NPC class versus the specialist character class. So I had to look at what I did. I had to fudge a bit. I've written 17 books. Over the last 13 years with Skirmisher, I've published 170 publications. I've started maybe 20 magazines, or started or run maybe 20 magazines or newsletters over the last 20 years. So I'm a specialist who has skill sets that are geared toward writing, editing, publishing, layout, design, and I would get all the bonuses that would give me skill focus, editing, or whatever. So I gave myself 10 levels in specialist. I thought that was reasonable based on the amount of work product I've done over the last 25 years or so in the field of publishing and writing. So I'm a fighter 2, specialist 10, cleric 1, with a strength of 12, a dex of 10, a con of 13, intelligence of 16, wisdom of 10, and charisma of 13 at this point in my life.
That is very detailed, very cool. And everybody, we are going to be taking all of our character sheets. We're going to be posting them all on a special blog post on d-infinity.net and the follow-up to the show. So if you want to take us and use us as NPCs in one of your campaigns, then take these sheets, run with them. Feel free, slip them into your pre-made character files for demos. Let us be a part of your game.
Our Varhola died right away. Or the name of our party will just be TPK.
Yeah, right.
The notorious TPK.
Yay.
All right, now our next question. This is a really cool, and this is a 2-part question. From David Paul Lehman wants to know: have you ever Rule 63'd yourself or heavy metaled yourself? And by heavy metal yourself, he means like the character Den from Heavy Metal, where instantly you go from a 98-pound weakling to Conan the Barbarian. Now, and for anyone who doesn't know what a Rule 63 is, Rule 63 is one of the rules of the internet and pop culture, which states that for any established male character, there is a female version of that character. This is a big thing in fan art. There's a lot of gender-reversed fan art. Right. As far as the Rule 63 part, no, I haven't. And that actually had never occurred to me, but since reading that question, if I was doing that, I don't know what I'd do, because I don't know if I would, how quantifiably different I would be, or a character based on me would be, if the gender was any different. That being said, I was heavily involved in Rocky Horror, so maybe I've already done this to myself back in my college days. But then, as far as the heavy metaling a character based on me, no, and I've been in games where people have done that, and it's always kind of like disastrous because once they get power to match their raging ids, the game just goes off the rail in these horrific ways. Like, we've all played with people who, if they were freed from consequence, they would just be monsters, and then the game just facilitates that. The closest it ever came from that, I had to make a character real quick to a game that I was kind of brought into in the middle that I didn't even know I was going to be playing, and so my character concept was just me if I actually had superpowers, since it was a super powered game. And it was a real tightrope walk because it was a game full of people who were effectively playing, turns out were playing themselves with superpowers, and were just always horribly abusing their superpowers. But because I can get obsessed with like moral minutia and philosophizing, I was always like, no, don't you see? Just because we have the power to run through a city at Mach 2 doesn't mean we should. Think of the property damage. Think of the loss of life from all the broken glass. And high body counts in that game.
I bet.
I don't know. Who'd like to chime in next on that?
Well, Brendan, you were seemed like you were thinking of something amusing while Will was talking. What about yours?
Well, I've never gender bended myself in an RPG, and actually, now that he mentions it, I'll give it a try because I've never done it. That's mostly because I don't tend to play myself a whole lot. So, but I have turned it up to 11 for my own character before, as it were. When I was playing myself, when I ran myself as a GM, as the main villain in the game, I did that. I basically, this was in that cyberpunk setting, I basically went from some nobody hacker who misled and betrayed the party all the way through up to a certain point, at which point he hooks himself up to a massive computer array and sort of becomes one with it and becomes the main villain in the adventure. And at which point the players realize they've been used this whole time, that he's an evil character. So yeah, no, I tried to play up all of my, I guess, most abrasive personality traits in that particular campaign, and blow any single one of my skills out of proportion at that point. But it was justified because I had just hooked myself up to a supercomputer, and so I was using it to augment my abilities or something like that. So really the only overblown trait I had in that game was my ability to mislead or manipulate people, and really that was just me taking advantage of my position as the GM.
Well, how about you, Lucas?
I've never done the Rule 63 on myself, but going back to what Mike said earlier, where as a writer, player, every character has a little bit of yourself. I guess every character I've played has been me, one aspect of me, to the extreme. Like using my animal knowledge, I'll overplay a druid or something. Or monk is me, all the physical things reversed, because I'm big and imposing, and a monk is small and agile and can do all the things I want to be able to do physically that I can't.
Now, how about you, Mike?
Yeah, I've been playing role-playing games for 32 years, so there's nothing that I haven't done at some point in the context of role-playing games. So I'm an old-school gamer, just like David Paul Lehman is. So yeah, I've tried a lot of different things. I'll say two things on this concept. One, I think it's a very compelling concept. It's very interesting. Brendan and I have talked about one of the main characters in the Swords of Coast Fantasy campaign setting. And we've determined, for reasons I won't go into now, but we've determined that that character is actually fated to change gender at some point.
Yep.
And that is going to really tie in with a story arc that we have. So it's something that we thought would actually really shake up a story when the other characters end up meeting this person and their female guys and feel that they're very familiar, and then realize, oh my God, this is our friend. This is someone that we've adventured with. So, and then that character will eventually gain the ability to shift gender at will. And this ties in with the whole idea of the blind sage from Grecian folklore, Tiresias, who could change gender, et cetera, et cetera. So thematically it ties in with what we're doing, but just from a story telling point of view. And then as far as just doing over-the-top kind of power-ups for characters, yeah, sometimes I like to do that. That's fun, but I usually won't do it for one character. I'll do it for the party. So I'll put the party in a position where they're in a strange land and they're facing some kind of an opponent that they cannot beat. I remember we had a party of like maybe 3rd or 4th level characters, and they were actually facing an entire orc army in a part of a ruined city that was focused on an ancient theater. And there was a giant and just 100 orcs, and the party ended up meeting a faun who was an avatar of the deity of theater, who didn't like the theater being occupied by the orcs, who gave them a draft of wine and told them to drink it. And this gave them some hideous buffing that made them go essentially insane. So it transformed them, turned them into monsters, but just big roided out killing machines. So they were able to do something in that scenario that they never saw coming, that they never thought they were going to do, and which allowed them to just obliterate an entire army. So they thought they were going to be adventuring, and instead we just turned it into like this epic, over-the-top Robert E. Howard / Michael Moorcock style battle at the end of time inside this massive theater with people just battling around this huge eye painted on the stage in the middle. So yeah, it's fun. It's a device you don't want to do it every time. I don't even do it once a year, but it's the kind of thing that you can do to just put a paradigm shift on a session, but just the session, not on the game or the campaign as a whole, and really allow the characters just to go way beyond what they expected, not see it coming, and do things that are just going to be epic and memorable in the context of the levels they were at that time.
And speaking of paradigm shift, I want to take one brief paradigm shift before we go into our last question, and that is, I figured this topic would have to have some gaming horror stories associated with it, and I thought if we might go around the room and share any people playing characters based on themselves style gaming horror stories, and I've got one. It's not so much a horror story as it is a story of dread, and I'm not going to name names because some people involved in this, I think, are watching tonight. However,
well, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Oh yeah, always glad to have you here. The more the merrier. So anyway, back as I was graduating high school, getting ready for college, one of the gaming groups I was heavily involved in, we had one particular player who, I didn't realize this at the time, but I figured it out later. The character that this person was playing was clearly a wish fulfillment version of themselves. However, they had such a distorted opinion of themselves that this wish fulfillment version was the most bland, boring, down-to-earth character in the entire game. No real personality, no real, not a really interesting background. They were just like a romantic name and a list of powers. But because this was quite literally this player's avatar into this whole world, any insult, criticism, or threat directed at the character was taken as a threat or an insult against the player, and vice versa. There was no wall of separation between them and their character when it came down to it. And as a result, any session was just a countdown until the moment when a player character or NPC said one thing that made this player entirely shut down, and we would have to scrap the session for the night. And that is such an unfair position to put a room full of players in, and I wish I was a good enough GM then as I was now, because I would have seen this coming and I would have talked to the GM and I would have talked to that player, because there's no reason why we couldn't all be having a good time and why we all had to be walking on eggshells hoping we didn't say that one thing that was just going to cut off the game halfway through. I'm not sure we ever got to the end of a scenario with that particular gaming group. There were a lot of time jumps in that campaign to get past those moments.
Right.
I've been in that situation. Well, back in high school, I had a player who was effectively doing the same thing. Put a lot of himself in this character, probably because he wasn't satisfied with what he was doing in life. And effectively, if anything didn't play out, it is beyond. This actually went beyond someone saying something inappropriate to this particular character. If anything played out in a way other than the way he saw it playing out in his own mind, his own imagination, he would effectively just become despondent and non-responsive. Sometimes you would get just flat out angry. A lot of times I would get accused of doing things I just wasn't doing. He anything I did that, again, was taking things in a different direction than his own vision, was railroading, for example. Oh, I'm railroading him all the time. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. We're just telling a story here, and you have as much control over this character in this game as you do over your character in the real world, and you're just going to have to get over it.
Right.
You know? But yeah, no, I've run into a very, very similar situation to you, Will, and I would say that's probably my horror story related to this particular subject. You really have to watch out for people who are putting that much of themselves into their character. You know, I'm all for exploring different elements of yourself. You know, like Mike said, when you're playing a new character, it's you. It's autobiographical, but you're playing a different element of yourself. You're exploring different aspects of your own psyche, right? How do I respond to being evil? How do I respond to being good? How do I respond to being a nature-worshipping hippie? You explore all of those things, right? But when you're putting all of yourself in the character and your identity is all in there, and its success is something that you sort of take as your own success, yeah, then things start to get really tricky. And like you said, Will, I grew from that as a GM. That's not something that I was able to handle at the time. That's something that I'm much more aware of now, and I have more skills or more tools in my belt to handle or deal with.
How about you, Lucas?
Well, like y'all, I've dealt with these same goblins that if everything's going their way, you're nice and happy. But you turn that little switch, and it's absolute frickin' rage. Yeah, a couple times had players that all of themselves was in one character, and dice didn't roll their way, or the NPC said something that they took offensive to, and they went all Gollum on us.
That's a good description. Went all Gollum on them. We're going to have to keep that in our lexicon.
Right.
How about you, Mike?
Well, I'm not going to allude to any horror stories. What I think is more amusing and insightful is this. It's one thing when a player designs a character of their choice. When they design a character of their choice, because that says something about them. But really, because they've picked all the variables, you're often not learning that much more about them than you already knew.
Sure.
What's interesting is if you give them a pre-gen, or there are 6 pre-gens, and they get to pick one of them. So they now no longer have a full range of variables. Now they've got 6 race class combinations to choose from. So really, and this is very true. It sounds maybe a little cynical, but it really is a psychology test. When you've got 6 characters in front of you, which one do you play? And I can't tell you, and I don't know what this means. I can't tell you how many times the big hulking guy that looks like an unmade bed and has a beard ends up being our halfling prostitute that looks like a little girl. I can't tell you how many times that has happened. And they really warm up to the role. I see this again and again. So to me, it's interesting not so much to look at someone who's chosen every variable themselves, but you know, in D&D, in 3.5 rules in D20, we talk in terms of templates. You put a template on a creature, and it changes the way it functions. Well, in a very real sense, putting a character sheet on a player is a template. It changes the way they function, and you can get some real insights. And I never do this deliberately. I've never said, well, I'm going to give so-and-so this character so I can probe their mind and learn more about them. I've never done that. It's only happened inadvertently. But I realize that this is very fundamentally true, that when you put a character sheet in front of someone, you are templating them, and you are fundamentally affecting the way they play. And if it doesn't affect the way they play, that says something too. If they can't respond to changed factors on a character sheet and have to play the last character they played without responding to what's in front of them, that says something too. I think that's what I find, and some of those experiences have been a little disturbing. Some of them have been frustrating. But to me, that is an interesting thing, because everybody is playing themselves. So when you give them something that is unlike themselves in the most obvious ways, that's when you get the most interesting insights. So less horror than just sort of generalized weirdness and interest.
Cool. All right. Well, our very last question comes once again from David Paul Lehman. Let's see. Wants to know what is the best game system for taking yourself into a fantasy world? And I will say, in all my experiences, the best game system for doing that is a game system where that is actually part of character creation, and that is Stuper Powers, where the whole point of that game is you are playing yourself, but blessed/cursed with up to 3 seemingly useless superpowers. But then you're thrown into a fight with actual supervillains and have to figure out what you would do. Like, what would happen if you did go up against Dr. Doom, but your only power was the ability to mate with any inanimate object, or the ability to use bagels as deadly weapons.
That's the most amazing superpower ever.
Yeah, and it's tremendously fun, and I love that that's integrated into the game. You are required to play yourself with these powers, and it leads to some really.
That was my superpower. I guess I'd use it.
Well,
Oh, you want to, certainly. It's just tremendously fun. I absolutely love that.
He has been defeated by someone whose only superpower is talking to squirrels.
Oh, very true. I don't know, but what about the rest of you guys?
Personally, I think the best system is one that's a point-buy system where you can pick and choose your abilities based on what you actually think you have instead of randomly rolling and hoping for the best.
Very cool. Brendan?
Well, I found the Swords of Infinity system made it really easy, only because it's a classless system. It's more organic, and I find that human beings are very rarely one class. And
That's
I think Mike's character is a really good example of that. And it's got the multi-classing system, but still there are certain requirements and things that each of those individual classes have that sort of pigeonhole you into certain things. And a more organic system with kind of, you know, more free form way of determining your skills and abilities ends up working really well for playing yourself, because, you know, every 7 years is all it takes for you to master a new skill. Odds are every 7 years you pick up something, unless you're a really one-dimensional person. Maybe you're so yeah, I think those are the kinds of systems that work really well for playing yourself. Because when we play heroes, typically we're playing an archetype, you know. So that's why the class system works. But when you're playing yourself, you want something a little bit more organic.
I understand the reservations people have with class-based systems. But, honestly, I like them. And if I turn the way I approach them around a little bit and just say, okay, a class-based system is just a macro. That's all it is. It's a collection of things that a given group of people have. You really could look at any given society and take half the people who live in that society and create a class. So when people say, well, I don't like class-based systems because they're not really very realistic, well, sure they are. They're realistic if you're looking at the actual skills and abilities people have within any given society. So in a D&D world, the class-based system is perfectly realistic because fighters have this array of skills and abilities. Priests or clerics have this array of skills and abilities. Does that translate to our own modern world perfectly? No, it doesn't. But you could come up with something, the expert or the specialist classes that we were talking about, that basically give somebody 10 skills they can pick from, and those are affected by their intelligence or other ability scores. That's what most people are. When it boils down to it, you can like it, you can not like it, but most people either have an array of skills or they don't have an array of skills. And if those array of skills can be expressed in terms of a class that we create for those purposes, then it is very easy to conceive of the world in a class-based system. But understanding that you're looking at it from the point of view of a class looking outward, it ends up being not feeling very organic. Taking those classes and looking at them as macros that encompass groups of people, it ends up being organic. If you can cover 99% of people in a society with your existing classes, then you just say, well, the other 1%, they've got a unique class. I just haven't statted it out yet. I haven't written it up yet. The world is a big, amazing place with lots and lots of variables. 99% of the people fit into one of these 12 classes. 1% of everything else fits into something else to be determined at need. So that's how I conceive of these things, and it works for me.
Very cool. Well, gentlemen, we've had a wonderful discussion, and that leaves us with nothing but our final thoughts. So, Brett, what is your final thought?
Well, let's see. Keep an eye out for the Skirmisher Road Trip documentary. I think it's actually going to be pretty interesting for people to watch and sort of see our experiences. And then also keep an eye on the d-infinity.net website, so dinfinity.online, for my next random generator, which will, of course, be based on Will Thrasher's random brothel generator. That's next. So the tavern generator was super popular, still is super popular, and so I see no reason to stop there. I'm going to continue and make more of these generators.
And that is a good collaboration between you and Will. That works really, really well. He does these random generators. We publish them as Jester Dragon's random generators in PDF form. People can download them and use them with dice in their games. People love that. But then people can go to our D-Infinity online website and with a click of a couple of buttons, use them there. So I think it's just a perfect combination of your two skill sets.
Yep.
It's fantastic, and also a little preview. I have also written up a random bumbling minion generator if you need to generate quick and dirty sidekicks for your antagonists. So
you always do.
Yeah, you always do. So look for that in the future. If you need a sniveling goblin with a skin condition, there you go. If you need a clumsy barbarian who is always drunk, it'll all be there. I guess my own final thought. Playing someone based on yourself can be fun, but do it sparingly. Unless you're canny enough to do a parody of yourself, there's a live-action role-playing game called Midnight at Terra Firma that I wrote with Brandon Petrie and Jason Aarons. And one of the conceits in that game is that 3 of the characters that the players play are actually based on us. Because there's a whole subplot involving people suing each other for copyright infringement. Well, our characters are there suing everyone for copyright infringement on a game we did called Midnight at Terra Firma, and we wrote them as parodies of ourselves, and they are hilarious to read. Now, actually, I might go ahead and add that to the list of things we put on the blog post. So if you can have fun with your foibles, you can get a lot of mileage out of playing yourself. Mike, what's your final thought?
Just to go back to my very first words on the show, I would just tell players and game masters, meditate upon the idea that everything you play is yourself. That every time you're playing something, you are in fact playing yourself. You don't have to take my word for this. You don't have to accept what I'm saying. Just contemplate the idea, and that every time you run a game, you are giving people, no matter what you do, a peek into your psyche. And Brendan and I we eat, drink, and play games. This is what we do. So we take these very seriously. So my comments might seem kind of weighty, but to me, games can be profound and reveal profound things. So I would just tell people, just contemplate this, meditate upon it, think about how much of you is coming out when you play and when you run a game.
And Lucas, as our special guest, you'll get the final thought.
All right, well, I'm going to start. It's a two-parter. I'm going to start off with the obvious joke that I'm surprised we've gone an hour and 6 minutes without anybody saying. Have fun playing with yourself. And, well, selfless self-promotion, whateme
Shameless self-promotion. We're always shameless with our
I
self-promotion.
prefer relentless self-promotion, but do go.
Relentless. Join me tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, Friday the 13th, as I launch myself into the craziest hell ever seen. Kickstarter.
Yes, look for Sagas of Old on Kickstarter, and look for us at d-infinity.net for all your gaming needs for any system you can imagine. We try to get it represented. So for myself, William T. Thrasher, for Michael Jolly Varhola, for Brendan Cass, and for our special guest artist and game designer Lucas Puryear, this has been D Infinity Live, and we will see you all next week.